applauded and cheered. But in fact, Jerry was framed. With his eyes red, he kicked the table and let out an angry roar towards the prosecutor who had accused him. That day, Jerry had just returned home and found his mother lying in a pool of blood, but then he saw his father also lying on the ground, with a bullet hole in his head, followed by his just-turned adult sister and 8-year-old brother. Jerry looked helpless, collapsed on the ground and kept backing away. He couldn't believe what was happening before his eyes. But when he called the police, they arrested him on the spot. The weapon used by the murderer was an airgun Jerry used in a competition, with his fingerprints on it. The prosecutor who interrogated him looked righteous and hated Jerry for killing his family. He pressed Jerry on the table and cursed him fiercely, swearing to make him betray the death penalty. But in fact, he only wanted to get famous by having the case in the news, and didn't care about the so-called truth. Jerry's family was killed and he was framed by the murderer. And in the end, he was sentenced to death. Jerry felt sad and aggrieved, but he was just an ordinary college student. What could he do? But then a turning point occurred in the case. The Supreme Court found that the evidence was insufficient and announced Jerry's innocence and release. The prosecutor nearby, who wanted to get famous, was disappointed with his failed plan. But even though Jerry was acquitted, the public was convinced that he was the murderer. Everyone called for his punishment, and the injustice and slander of his family's tragic death made him collapse. He decided to end his life and went to the Han River Bridge to jump. But suddenly, a hand grabbed the railing. Jerry had a change of heart and decided to live well, and then find the killer to avenge his family. After years of effort, he had become a super rich person with personal assets exceeding 800 billion Korean won. He used every means to find the killer, but even after several years, there was no trace of the killer. It was as if the killer had never existed. But at this moment, Jerry was killed by a mysterious person. And with that, the story of the comic ends. The artist Sean looked at the protagonist of his work, Jerry lying in a pool of blood, and showed a satisfied smile. What the hell is this? It turns out to be an unfinished comic. But is it really just a comic? I can tell you for sure, it's not. The next day, Sean's daughter Lydia came to his studio and found out that her father had written Jerry's death in the comic. She was so angry that she was about to call her father to change the ending. But at that moment, a bloody hand suddenly grabbed Lydia's clothes from behind in the void. It was Jerry.